Good evening. I'm Erik Bottcher, and I'm the council member representing District 3, which includes the Village, Chelsea, and Hell's Kitchen in the City Council. And I'm excited to host what I hope is the first of many episodes of M&N's Represent NYC. And I couldn't have asked for a better guest on the show than my friend Jessica Tisch, the Commissioner of the Department of Sanitation. I really want to thank you for being here. And when we met the first time, you told me that this was your dream job, to be the Commissioner of Sanitation. Tell us why this is your dream job, and tell us a little bit about your professional background.
So there's a few reasons why sanitation has been the dream job for quite a while. Among them, sanitation is the essential service. If we don't do our jobs for one day, all New Yorkers notice. And it's tied up in health, it's tied up in public safety, and it's tied up in the cleanliness of the city. So I really look at it as the essential function. But more than that, the Department of Sanitation wrestles with and takes the lead on what I think are some of the main policy issues of our generation. So, as an example, sustainability. We run the city's composting program and recycling program. So this job is really a mix for me of essential nuts and bolts day-to-day service combined with the policy issues that are going to shape the next generation.
Great. Well, we've seen a lot of you on the news, your initiative. We've heard you talking about rats and all the good stuff, but tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this job.
Sure. I have worked in city government for 15 years. Most of that time was at the New York City Police Department. I worked my way up from the bottom. I was hired as an intelligence research specialist working in counterterrorism. And for most of my career, I served as Deputy Commissioner of IT at the NYPD, where I really worked to transform the way that policing works in New York City. So one great example was changing the way New York City police officers respond to emergency calls for service. So historically, the way it's always been is someone calls 911, a call taker takes the information, types it into the system. That information then gets transferred to a dispatcher who's dispatching probably to 2 zones on a busy night. There could be 10 jobs queued. That call doesn't get immediately to the officer responding in the street. We gave all the officers smartphones with a 911 app on their phone, and those officers now get their 911 jobs, their calls for service, as soon as they're typed into the system. So what I loved about working at the police department was working on these big things that change the way policing works. Another example, we gave body cameras to every officer in the department. So that was my experience at NYPD. Right before the pandemic, I went to lead the agency that oversees all of the city's tech. I showed up like 3 weeks before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and it was like, surprise, everything has to go online. So there, I built the city's contact tracing system. I led the team that built the city's Vax for NYC, the vaccination system. Gave 500,000 iPads to New York City public school students. We put Wi-Fi in every homeless shelter that serves families with children. We oversaw 311, which at the time basically became the city's COVID hotline. So a lot of great things at the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications. And that brings me here. I've been the Sanitation Commissioner for about 8 months.
Great. So now you're in charge of the Department of Sanitation. It's got to be the biggest in the world, right, of any city, or in the United States, surely.
It's certainly the largest municipal sanitation force in the United States.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about what you've done at Do It and NYPD in terms of technology. How is that informing what you're doing at the DSNY?
Yeah, I think most of my historical experience in city government comes to bear at the Department of Sanitation because it's understanding how to run a a city agency. How does the big bureaucracy work? How does the agency fit into it? How do you deploy resources to get the most for New Yorkers? I also have a very heavy data background. I'm a very data-driven person. And one of the things that we're working on at the Department of Sanitation is making that a data-driven organization in different ways. So as an example, we should be able to see by sanitation district all of the 311 calls for service for the past week, for the past month, for the past year. Are they going up compared to this time last year? Are they going down? Which categories are going in what direction? As a way to be able to gauge and frame where and how we deploy our resources. And I always think that a data-centered approach delivers the best results for customers. The 8.8 million New Yorkers are our customers. How do we deliver a cleaner city for them? Looking at the data and understanding the data has to be a critical part of that.
Is that data not available currently publicly? Is that becoming publicly available?
There's so much data that is available. It's available through open data in New York City. What I'm talking about is doing at the Department of Sanitation what was done at the NYPD through CompStat. And so presenting the data in a very consumable way for our business, for our superintendents, for our sanitation workers, so that they can see it, so that they can measure their performance against it, and so that they can use it to deploy their resources most effectively to serve New Yorkers and our communities.
Great. Are you going to give it a name like?
We're going to work on that.
Okay. Trash stat or something like that.
That has been bounced around.
Okay. I get asked this a lot. People want to know, why is New York dirtier than other cities? And I'm not just talking about overflowing waste baskets or trash bags on the street, but when you go to other parts of the world and other cities, you often just see a cleaner sidewalk. Is that just because New York is just a grittier town? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a few things going on. First, New York City is really dense. It's much denser than any of the other major American cities, and there's just more people packed into less space. And so that obviously has implications for the cleanliness of our city. Beyond that, I think there's two different categories we have to talk about. First is what happened during the pandemic. And the second is like longer term, more strategic issues. Let's start with what happened during the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, the cleanliness function was completely obliterated from the New York City Sanitation Department. And when I say obliterated, I mean it was defunded. And I think that the results of that experiment speak for themselves. I think it's not controversial to say that during the pandemic, the city got meaningfully dirtier. And I hate to say it, but that's what happens when you cut funding or you have funding for litter basket service. If the litter baskets aren't serviced, they overflow. That's what happens when you cut in half street sweeping. The curb lines get filthy.
What you're referring to is the fact that when the shutdown happened, people were inside, so they used that opportunity to not empty the corner baskets as much, half as much.
It was, remember, it was a very scary time.
But they didn't restore it. They kept it cut.
Yeah, it was a scary time. There were terrible concerns about the budget in the city, and the cleanliness function of the sanitation department was one place the city turned to save money. And I think what that experience shows is when times get tough, the place not to divest from is cleanliness.
Absolutely.
Because the city can't come back, it can't grow, it can't prosper if it's dirty, or dirty conditions make it much more difficult to do that. So at the beginning of the Adams administration, the mayor, working with the council, of course, and I know you were a big champion of it, restored all of the things all of the cleanliness functions that had been cut at the beginning of the pandemic. Sweeping of our highway on and off ramps, the litter basket service, the mechanical brooms. And I believe that all of those things taken together have made a dent in the cleanliness of many neighborhoods in our city. I'll give you one piece of data. I said I was a data-driven person. One piece of data that to me is very encouraging, that very basic strategy is working. Our litter basket complaints since the new service kicked in on July 1st are down almost 60%. That is the single largest decrease in litter basket complaints.
And more
ever.
in Council District 3.
Yep, more in Council District 3, which is wonderful. You know, we obviously we would love to run unlimited every hour service to every litter basket in the city. There are about 23,000 of them. That's not possible to do at a city of our scale. And so what we've done is we've put in place a data-driven plan to service litter baskets where they are used and needed most. So you will see more litter basket service in every borough in commercial corridors. And so in many commercial corridors, those baskets, they had been during the pandemic served maybe like once a day. They're now being serviced 3 times a day. And so we're being careful about how and where we're deploying our resources to get the biggest bang for our buck. And that's a great example of an area where I think New Yorkers are seeing and feeling an important difference. But I said, in response to your question, which was why dirtier? I said I thought there were 2 types of issues: the short term, which is like the pandemic created issues, but also like the longer term, more systemic issues. And I'll give you a few examples and how we're addressing them, if that would be helpful. The first is, historically in New York City for the past 50, 60 years, there have been, 40 years, there have been parts of the city that have been out of the jurisdiction of the Department of Sanitation to clean. These, what I call no man's lands, exist in every borough, in every neighborhood of our city. And they are underpasses, overpasses, entrances to highways, streets along highways, like side streets along highways, medians, greenways. And those types of locations just hadn't been cleaned in decades. And so one of the things that the mayor recently announced is giving the Department of Sanitation both the funding and the jurisdiction to clean these 1,600 plus locations, again, through every neighborhood in the city for the first time in a really long time. And not only are they gonna be cleaned once, they're gonna be cleaned every month, some like multiple times a month, whatever is needed to keep these former no man's land locations clean will be done. The other type of issue is like, in New York City, our trash sits on the street from 4 p.m. when we set it out until historically 6 a.m. when it's collected.
How many nights a week?
6 nights a week. That's 14 hours a day that the plastic trash bags are sitting on our curb lines. And it's not a small amount of trash. It's 24 million pounds of trash on our curbs every single day, 6 days a week. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is shrinking the amount of time that trash bags sit on our curbs for 2 reasons. One, it's gross. No one wants to play a game of hopscotch around the big bags, especially not when they're coming home from work, when they're walking their kids to school in the morning, which is always there. And the second is like, it's the all-you-can-eat buffet for rats. Like, I know, people see me and they're like, oh, the rat lady. But like, it's true. It's that food waste in the black bags is the all-night, all-you-can-eat buffet for rats. So one of the things we've been trying to do is shrink the amount of time that the trash bags spend on the streets. And so we've announced a new rule whereby the set-out time for trash is going to be moved back in New York City from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. starting on April 1st. If you want to put your trash out earlier at 6 p.m., you can do so, but it must be in a container with a lid. And what the department is doing is we are collecting more of it earlier. So instead of 100% of our collection happening at 6 a.m., now a lot of our collection is starting to happen on the midnight shift. We're up to about 25% of all collection citywide that's going on at midnight, and like the results are really good. That has started, but the combination of more collection earlier and people setting out the trash later should shrink the 14 hours that trash spends on the streets today to maybe 4 to 6 hours after April 1st. And so I think those types of things that just haven't been wrestled with are going to make a really big difference. And then the last point I would make on this topic is we have seen over the past decade, many cities, in particular European cities, have really innovated in waste management. And that hasn't happened in New York City. We haven't rolled out a containerization strategy. You go to Europe, many European cities have shared containers on the curbs. You don't see black bags on the street. The cities that don't, they don't set out their trash at 4 p.m. They set it out at 8 p.m. and it's collected overnight. You don't see it. And so the opportunities in New York City to make a really big dent on the way that the city looks and feels are massive. And I am committed to wrestling with those issues and doing everything I can to make the progress that hasn't really been made over the past decade, looking at other cities who have already done it as good examples.
I want to thank you for mentioning containerization. As you know, that's been one of my main issues when I ran for city council. It was one of my main issues, and I've really found that people in New York, as they travel the world, they look around at the sanitation situation and they are beginning to not be okay with the status quo here.
Yeah,
We've lived this way for decades and decades.
Yeah, I am not okay with the status quo either. And that's one thing that I want all New Yorkers to know. And I am someone who, in my career, has always pushed hard and never accepted the status quo, even when people have told me it's not possible. So containerization is like one area that a bunch of people have pushed me. No one has pushed me more in this area, more than you. And we are studying it right now.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because earlier this spring, we all attended the unveiling of some pilot containers, right? We were in Times Square. They're going up in business improvement districts around the city, these bins in the curb where they're putting the waste instead of on the sidewalk. There's a residential pilot beginning in Hell's Kitchen on 46th Street. But that's not really going to get us where we need to go. So you are initiating a study, a comprehensive study, and a few $1 million have been allocated to a consultant. Tell us about this and tell us about what specifically is going to happen and then the timeline to getting us there.
Containerization is so much more than throwing a container on a street and asking New Yorkers to put their trash in the container. Containerization actually is a massive infrastructure project that can and will affect every single neighborhood, every single block in this city. And from my perspective, you have an opportunity to do it once. You got to do it once, and you got to do it right. And if you do it wrong, the results are truly catastrophic.
The example I always think about is the healthcare.gov website, and I'll never forget Health Secretary Sebelius on the Jon Stewart show, right? And how embarrassing that was when that healthcare site crashed. Obamacare never really recovered from that because it was people's first impression. So this program, when it gets launched one day, it has to go right.
It has to go right. And let me just tell you, when I say it's a massive infrastructure program, I don't just mean the scale. I don't just mean that the containers are on every block in the city. We need to figure out by block, how much curb space is there? How big do the containers need to be? Is there enough curb space available to accommodate the containers? What's our collection frequency have to be? Because right now, you walk through some neighborhoods, they have massive, big piles of trash. You can't make put a container permanently on the street that is that big. Like in most cities that have containerization, they don't have collection 3 days a week. They have collection 6, 7 days a week.
Is that being studied as a possibility?
Yes, that is all part of looking at, we're not looking at the feasibility, developing the plan for how to roll out containerization in our city. I'll give you another example. When we have containers, you're not going to see sanitation workers picking up the bags and throwing them into the back of the truck, right? You hoist the container into the truck. How does our fleet have to change? I mean, there are a bunch of issues, and we decided that we wanted, with your support, thank you for it, that we needed to do a 24-week study of all of these very complicated issues and a bunch of the moving parts, develop the plan, which we're going to put out to New Yorkers as soon as it's complete. We're about halfway through the study, and explain to New Yorkers what the plan is and then proceed from there. But I will say that containerization is something that has been talked about in New York City for over a decade, and very little progress had been made.
Composting, organic waste disposal. As you know, I and you and the City Council, we support universal organic waste disposal in New York City. And it's something that other municipalities have done. New York City, we're far from it. Can you walk us through what the plan is to get there? The City Council has legislation that would mandate it in the not too distant future. And we had a hearing about it, and you were raising some concerns about if we just mandate it too quickly, how it might not work. There's a borough-wide program happening right now in Queens. What is the plan to get New York to a universal organic waste program, a mandatory program that New Yorkers have to do with their landfill, their recycling, and their organics? So
2 months ago, a little less than 2 months ago, we launched the largest curbside organics program in the country. Serves the entire borough of Queens, which means that every address in Queens every week gets curbside organics collection. What is organics? Organics is basically anything from your kitchen, any food waste, any food soiled paper, paper napkin that has food on it, a paper plate that has food on it, and basically anything from your garden, your leaves, your lawn, anything from the garden or the kitchen. And what we did is we said, all right, every resident in Queens, we're rolling to your house every week, set out your organic waste for it, and we will come collect it. This program differs substantially from previous organics collection programs that had been rolled out in New York City, where there has been a history of start and stop. And I said this in an interview once, and it kind of caught on. Like, organics in New York City has become a psychodrama. And so I thought we have to test this in a whole borough, not in a district or two. Test this new program in a whole borough, and we wanted to do two things. We wanted to show that the program was cost effective, meaning the city can afford to roll it out to every resident, to every address in the city. And so I think that we've designed a highly cost-effective program, and that it's effective, meaning we're actually collecting material. The trucks aren't running around empty. So we've done a few things. On the cost side, we have halved the cost of this organics collection program if you compare it to prior programs that the city has rolled out.
How so?
A few different efficiencies. First, very obviously, is people efficiencies. So our program is run on straight time, not on overtime. If it's run on overtime, it's time and a half, sometimes 2 times as expensive. So we are running the program on straight time. That's the first thing. And the second thing, the big one, is truck efficiencies. I don't need a whole rear loader in many parts of New York City to collect organic waste. I can dual bin it, which means the same sanitation workers that are collecting your refuse also in the other side of their truck will collect your organic waste. And so we have really minimized the number of additional truck starts that we have to run to implement this organics program in Queens.
Well, we look forward to having you at the council soon to give us an update when this Queens program wraps up and all the data is finalized. And I really want to thank you for coming here on the show. As you know, sanitation is one of my signature issues because, like you said, the future of New York is so tied in with our ability to get a handle on these issues like sanitation, quality of life, because people now have a degree of mobility that they didn't have years ago. They could live in many places, so we had to put our best foot forward as a city. And if people are stepping over piles of trash, if they have rats running over their feet, they're not gonna wanna live here, visit here, or work here. So I really wanna thank you for your efforts and really look forward to partnering with you on all the issues we talked about today.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for being here and for joining us for this edition of Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network.